All right, welcome to the deep dive. We got a really interesting bunch of stuff sent in for this one. Articles, notes, all about getting a bachelor's degree in New Zealand. Sounds pretty cool, right?
Yeah, definitely. Lots to unpack.
So, whether you're listening from Bangladesh, India, Nigeria, or anywhere else in the world, we're going to try and make this deep dive super useful for you. Basically, we're going to boil it all down, to the most important stuff so you can start figuring out if this whole New Zealand thing is something you really want to go for.
Yeah, exactly. We went through everything you sent, and like you said, the goal is to give you a clear picture of what a bachelor's degree in New Zealand really means. Cut through all the noise and highlight what matters most at this stage.
One thing that kept popping up in your research, it's obvious, but it's the whole appeal of New Zealand. And I mean, beyond just those amazing pictures you see everywhere,
Right, there's more to it than just scenery.
way more, yeah. What really stood out was this idea of like super high quality education, and it's recognized globally. Plus, there's that whole lifestyle thing, incredible nature mixed with modern living.
hmm
And then on top of that, consistently across your sources, New Zealand ranks high in student satisfaction and safety. I mean, that's a big deal.
Huge.
Oh, and there's also this really interesting thing mentioned in a couple articles, the possibility of working part-time while studying, and even like pathways to stay and work after graduation.
It's interesting, right? Because all your sources point to this sort of holistic experience. It's not just the degree itself, it's about the whole environment. And those mentions of high satisfaction and safety, I think, that suggests a really supportive atmosphere for international students,
Mhm.
which is massive when you're thinking about moving so far from home.
Definitely.
And then you add the potential for work, both during your studies to help with costs and afterwards to gain experience. That adds a whole other practical dimension.
Makes it much more realistic. All right, so based on what you sent us, you're giving this serious thought. So let's break down the bachelor's degree itself in New Zealand. What's the typical structure? What are some of the fields you should know about?
All right, so typically, a bachelor's degree in New Zealand, it's a 3-year full-time deal.
Okay, straightforward.
But there's a catch. Some of your materials pointed this out. Professional fields, like engineering or nursing, they often go for 4 years.
Oh, right. Yeah, I see.
And that extra year, usually it's for practical components,
Hmm.
extensive lab work, clinical placements, stuff like that, which, those are essential for registration in those fields.
Makes sense. So in terms of what you can actually study, what are some of the popular areas you saw international students going for?
Well, your research actually lines up pretty well with broader trends. We see a lot of interest in arts and humanities.
Yeah, those are pretty versatile, right?
Exactly. They give you that foundation, critical thinking, communication skills, which apply to lots of careers. And then, of course, there's business and commerce,
Hmm.
always popular, probably because they're so directly relevant to so many industries. Information technology, another big one. I mean, the global demand is huge, so that's no surprise.
And then I thought this was interesting, given New Zealand's whole thing with agriculture and sustainability, agriculture and environmental studies pop up a lot too.
Yeah, definitely a strong area for them. And we already touched on this, but with those longer degree durations, engineering and health sciences, those are big areas too for international students.
All right, so you've got some potential degrees in mind. Now, where are you actually going to study? Which universities came up in your research?
Okay, so there are a few universities that show up consistently in rankings and reviews. The University of Auckland, that one's often highlighted. It's comprehensive, research intensive, tons of programs. The University of Otago, another one that's mentioned a lot. It's known for its strong academic reputation, but also like a vibrant student culture.
That's important.
Yeah. And then there's Victoria University of Wellington in the capital. They have particular strengths in areas like public policy and law, as some of your articles pointed out.
How interesting.
Massey University has campuses all over. They've got a strong national presence, lots of different disciplines. And finally, we talked about this earlier, but Lincoln University, that's the one that's super specialized in agriculture, environmental sciences.
All right, so let's say you've got a degree and a few universities in mind. What about actually getting in? What kind of academic background do you need? What about language skills?
Okay, so the admission process usually focuses on a few key areas. Academically, most of your sources say you need to have finished the equivalent of New Zealand's Year 13, which is usually 12th grade.
So, high school diploma, basically.
Right. Now, depending on your country, this could be your HSC, your A-levels, or some other equivalent. Universities are going to look closely at your transcripts and your grades from those.
So, high school performance really matters. What about proving you can handle university level classes in English?
Yeah, that's where English language proficiency comes in. You
Mhm.
saw this on the university websites you shared, right? If English isn't your first language, you usually have to take a test, something like IELTS. The typical score they want is 6.0 to 6.5 overall.
Okay.
But, and this is important, they usually have a minimum score for each section of the test. Usually no band less than 5.5. Some of your notes mention this. Always, always check the specific requirements for the program and university you're interested in, because they can be stricter.
Good advice. So you've got the grades, the language skills. What other documents do you need for your application?
Well, besides your transcripts and your English test, obviously you'll need a passport. That's a given.
Of course.
Many universities will also ask for a statement of purpose, which is sometimes called a personal essay. This is your chance to really explain why you want this specific program in university. Talk about your academic background, your career goals, what makes you a strong candidate.
It's your time to shine.
Exactly. And for certain programs, especially in creative fields like design, architecture, or fine arts, they might want a portfolio, showing off your past work and your skills.
Okay, so that's a good overview of what you need to apply. But let's be real, studying abroad, that's a big financial commitment. What about tuition fees? What about the cost of living in New Zealand?
All right, so for most bachelor's degrees, international students, you're looking at around NZD 22,000 to NZD 32,000 per year for tuition.
Okay.
But remember, that's just an average. The exact cost it really depends on what you're studying in the university itself. More specialized programs, anything with a lot of lab components, that might be more expensive.
All right, so what about day-to-day expenses? How much should you budget for?
Well, your research suggests around NZD 15,000 to NZD 18,000 per year for living costs. This covers things like accommodation, which can be pricey, and food, transportation, internet, textbooks, all that good stuff.
That's a pretty big range though, right?
Yeah, and that's because your actual spending, it's going to depend on your lifestyle and how good you are at budgeting.
Okay, fair enough. So what are some things that can make those costs go up or down?
Location's a big one. You actually mentioned this in your notes. Big cities like Auckland and Wellington, they're more expensive, especially for rent. Smaller cities, university towns like Palmerston North or Lincoln, they tend to be cheaper.
Gotcha. So choosing the right place can save you money.
Absolutely. And then your accommodation choices matter too. University dorms, shared apartments, homestay, those all come with different price tags.
All right, so studying abroad, big cost. Are there scholarships or financial aid for international students doing bachelor's degrees?
Yeah, thankfully your research shows there are quite a few scholarships out there.
That's good to hear. Can you give us some examples of scholarships a bachelor's student might be eligible for? What did you see in the materials?
Definitely. A lot of New Zealand universities have their own scholarships, specifically for international undergrads, like the University of Auckland has the International Student Excellence Scholarship. That one's for high achievers. Massey University has the Massey University International Undergraduate Scholarship. That one's for talented students in all sorts of disciplines.
Nice.
And, sticking with our theme, Lincoln University, they have a bunch of scholarships for, you guessed it, agriculture and environment-related fields.
Hmm.
You might also come across the Manakaki New Zealand scholarships. But as you noted, those are usually more for master's degrees and students from specific countries, so less common for bachelors.
Good to know the difference. What are some key things to keep in mind when applying for scholarships?
The biggest thing, and universities really emphasize this, is that most of these scholarships are merit-based. So your grades, your academic record, sometimes even extracurriculars, that's what they're looking at.
Okay, so academics matter.
Big time. And another crucial tip, and I can't stress this enough, apply early. Scholarship deadlines, they're often way before the program deadlines. So get those applications in ASAP.
Got it. Apply early. Now, let's think beyond the degree. What about work, both during your studies and after you graduate?
Yeah, this is a big question for a lot of international students. Good news is New Zealand lets international students with a valid visa work part-time while they study, usually up to 20 hours per week during semesters.
That's a decent amount.
Yeah, it's a good way to earn some money, help with living expenses, and you get to experience the New Zealand workplace. Plus, during breaks like summer vacation, there's no limit on how much you can work.
So you can really catch up during breaks. What kind of jobs do international students usually find?
Retail and hospitality are popular. Those industries tend to be flexible with schedules, which helps when you have classes. In more rural areas, there might be seasonal work on farms or vineyards, especially during harvest.
I can see that.
Some students with the right skills might find office jobs, like admin assistants. But yeah, the jobs available, it really depends on where you are and what's going on in that local economy.
Makes sense. And what about after graduation? Can you stay and work in New Zealand?
Yes, New Zealand has this thing called the post-study work visa. Basically, it lets international students stay and work after they finish their degree. How long you can stay depends on your qualification.
So it's not a guarantee.
Right, but like some of your sources mentioned, if you graduate with a bachelor's, you might be able to stay for up to 3 years. That gives you time to build your resume and potentially even apply for residency later on.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, but remember, the rules for this visa can change, so always check Immigration New Zealand's website for the latest info.
All right, good advice. We've covered a ton of information in this deep dive. Let's try to summarize it. What are some key takeaways? Any pro tips you can share?
Absolutely. So first, applications. You can usually apply directly on the university's website, but some students like working with education agents. They can guide you through the process.
I can see that being helpful.
Regardless, start early, like 6 to 8 months before you want to start, especially if you're aiming for the February or July intake.
Makes sense. What about a standout application? What do you absolutely need?
2 things. A good IELTS score, got to show off those English skills, and a strong personal statement. That's where you really sell yourself.
Right, make it personal.
Yeah, tell your story, explain your goals, put effort into it.
Okay, and we talked about location affecting costs. Any final tips on that?
Definitely consider regional areas.
Mm-hmm.
Like we said, living costs can be a lot lower. Plus, studying in certain regions might give you extra points if you want to apply for residency later. Oh, and one more thing. Before you settle on a city, look into the part-time job market there. See what kind of opportunities are available. That way you can plan your finances better.
Fantastic. So we've done a deep dive, a real deep dive, into getting a bachelor's degree in New Zealand. We explored the appeal, the different degrees, how to apply, the costs, scholarships, working during and after your studies. A lot of info.
We wanted to give you a good foundation, the most important things to think about as you explore this opportunity.
So as you're processing all this, think about what really stands out to you. Are you drawn to the academic reputation of the universities? Is it the lifestyle that's calling you? Or maybe it's the potential for work and staying in New Zealand long term. Let that guide you as you start checking out specific programs that match your interests.
And who knows, maybe down the road you might even consider a master's degree in New Zealand.
Right, there's always that.
That's a whole other deep dive, with specialized scholarships, research opportunities, all that.
Absolutely. There's so much to explore in the world of international education. But for now, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into studying for a bachelor's degree in New Zealand. Until next time, ka keenan!